Welcome to Exploring Sunday's Scriptures for Tuesday, December 21st. I'm not going to be looking at the scriptures for Christmas Eve, but just jumping right to the scriptures associated with this coming Sunday, since this is Exploring Sunday Scriptures, which is the first Sunday in Christmas. Now, interestingly, there's a couple of options that present themselves, particularly if you rely upon the lectionary for this brief season of Christmas. Christmas is a season extending from December 25th to Epiphany, January the 6th. And so that means there are 2 Sundays, 3 perhaps if you include Epiphany, that are part of this season. The season tends to highlight the very little bit that we have of Jesus as a child, which really doesn't constitute a whole lot in our gospel recording. The important part of Jesus' life essentially began at his baptism and his public ministry, so much later in his life. So we have the Nativity of Jesus as recorded from Luke predominantly, which is the focus of Christmas Eve. And then we have from Luke's gospel also one event from his early life. The option that presents itself in place of the one that I will be reading for this week is to use John's Prologue, which is the very first chapter of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and God was the Word. You also can hear that as part of Christmas Eve, but that is a choice for this first Sunday in the season of Christmas, to combine into the eternal nature of God in the incarnation of Jesus Christ. And it certainly was one that I contemplated for a period of time. Should we spend a little more time in this season of Christmas, particularly focusing on this origin, if you will, of God, this origin story? But decided that I would go with these very few passages that we have concerning Jesus' childhood, because this is the only time that we ever have these particular stories as well. Now, what it means is we jump on December 24th from the birth of Jesus and his being laid in a manger to all of a sudden on December 26th, 2 days later, stories of him as a child in the temple. That can be rather jarring, as we're still really at the nativity of Jesus. Now we're jumping all the way into his childhood. Calendars don't align so neatly, and so we kind of have to jam all of this time into a very short period, in our case, this season of Christmas, before we're back into the green Sundays of ordinary time following on Epiphany, the arrival of the Magi. So there we're pushed back into those early stories of Jesus, or the baptism of Jesus, which is what follows generally Epiphany. So I'm going to read the ones that have a little bit from Jesus' childhood. Because we're picking up on the lectionary and its rhythm, we have Old Testament, New Testament, and Gospel. So I will be reading all 3 of those and sharing them with you. The first one is from 1 Samuel in the 2nd chapter, and it's 3 verses, 2 verses, 18 through 20, and then another verse, verse 26. And this is how it reads. Samuel was ministering before the Lord, a boy wearing a linen ephod. His mother used to make for him a little robe and take it to him each year when she went up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. Then Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, "May the Lord repay you with children by this woman for the gift that she has made to the Lord." And then they would return to their home. Now the boy Samuel continued to grow both in stature and in favor with the Lord and with the people. This inclusion of Samuel's childhood probably is a direct link to what we will hear from the Gospel of Luke. Samuel also is the one who eventually identifies, or is called by God to identify, David. And we know that part of the prophecies fulfilled in Jesus is his lineage, or linking back to the family of David through Joseph. And so picking up on the story of Samuel would create this correlation with David, but it certainly speaks of the childhood. Now, his mother, Elkanah, was the one who couldn't have children and really struggled with that, and then prayed to God and received the blessing eventually of a child. Now, in her prayer to God, she promised that the child would be in ministry or in service to God. And so when Samuel was still very young, he was set apart for this service. So the only time that his mother and father, Eli and Elkanah, saw Samuel was when they annually made this visit to the temple. Part of what they did when they went there to see him is they still had a relationship. They were still his parents. It's not as though his serving in that capacity made it so he was not part of the family anymore. And so his mother took him a present. And the present happened to be the garment that he wore in his ministry or service there at the temple. And it talks about it being a linen ephod. There is some link to the garments even that clergy wear today in being somewhat like this robe or this garment that he wore, the ephod. Now linen breathes, it flows differently, and so that could be speaking to that. It also being linen would certainly speak to this being a very valuable gift that was given annually by Elkanah to Samuel. The other link that we have, and why the 26th verse was attached to this, is the connection with Samuel growing in stature and favor with God. So it's a growth not only of his physical personage, but in his holiness, in his understanding of God, and in his witness to God, who he was as a person, that over time continued to be very important. Let me shift over to the New Testament reading, which is Colossians, and this is the 3rd chapter. This is what's sometimes known as the gifts of the Spirit. Let me share with you what's here, and we will then explore it. As God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Bear with one another, and if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other, just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in the one body. And be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Teach and admonish one another in all wisdom, and with gratitude in your hearts, sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs to God. And whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. So I'm going to create a correlation here to Samuel. This passage talks about clothing yourselves. Now it gives qualities of how one is in our interactions with others in the world as far as what that clothing looks like. Whereas with Samuel, we had the linen ephod that was espoused. So if I had to say there is a way to connect these two passages together, it's by this sense of clothing. And part of what clothing yourself with God looks like, or clothing yourself with Christ looks like, is these qualities that are there. So it's not an outer garment, but you might say an inner garment that is visible on the outer self. And we have what they call a virtue list. So Paul often employs these, or these were very common in Greek writing or in writings of that time, that they would have vice or virtue lists. Vice lists obviously are those lists of what we might call the 7 deadly sins, or other facets of sin in lists that expose those different things. Well, a virtue list is the same, or its complement, just in the positive side. So these are virtues to be upheld. So if a vice list is all of those bad things, these are the good things to focus on, and that's what we have here in compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. We have ideas of forgiveness and being bound together, but the virtue list is compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Compassion is another way of expressing love one another. Kindness has to do with trying to think of another word for kindness. It gets kind of hard when you're looking for synonyms for words and you keep just stumbling on the same word and struggle to find a description that can provide you a different avenue to the same word. Humility is putting others before yourself. Meekness is not being arrogant or haughty about yourself. Patience, and obviously patience is another one of those self-explanatory things. So there's a virtue list that's there. We also have other things. Peace, be thankful, let Christ's word dwell richly in you. And then how this all leads to one's being in the world. And that's with gratitude, singing out, like things aren't going to affect you. In fact, they will deflect off of you because of these realities that you hold as your inner truth. So that nothing really can get in you and affect you because of this. In other places, Paul talks about putting on the armor of Christ. Well, here he's saying clothe yourself. I think it's a similar comparison that he's trying to say is if these are the ways that you are in the world, if these are how you are in the world, then you will be able, no matter what is done to you, what is said to you, what is thrown at you, you will be okay. And that is all done not for your own well-being or not because of how it benefits you specifically, but because of your faith in Christ. I'm going to shift over to Luke just so we have a little bit of time with the childhood of Jesus before I conclude. I am ambitious to still do Exploring Sunday Scriptures next Tuesday, online only. There won't be an in-person option to explore. We're going to explore Epiphany's readings at that point, so you will have that available online. It is my ambition to do that. We'll see what happens in the wake of the weekend, how good I am at maintaining what my hopes are at this point in time. But with all hope, I'm ambitious to have it available to all of you. So Luke chapter 2. Now the second chapter is where we encounter the nativity of Jesus. So if you read through Luke's gospel, you'll realize how quickly we move right from the nativity of Jesus to this episode. It just skips and all of a sudden we're here. So it's not as though there's transition that really provides us a passage of years to get us to this place. There isn't anything. We're like at the stable there with Jesus, and Mary and Joseph, shepherds, have visited, and she ponders everything in her heart, and all of a sudden we're here. And this is where the here is. Now every year his parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was in the group of travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." He said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart, and Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. All right, so a couple of correlations to the other passages. The increasing in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. Samuel. Now the boy Samuel continued to grow in both stature and in favor with the Lord and with people. So we have a parallel here. Would Luke have been familiar? Well, it is generally thought, scholars think, that Luke was well educated, but that he likely was a Gentile. And while there would have been familiarity with these prophecies or these experiences of what we call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, how familiar he would have been is really hard to discern. Early Christians, by and large, we might even call them Jewish Christians. There wasn't a New Testament as we think of it. There wasn't, in fact, really writings of much at all at the time that Luke was writing. Maybe some things were circulating. Paul's letters might have been circulating, but there wasn't a Bible as we have now, which means that the only stories or Bible they had were the Hebrew Bible. So maybe some familiarity, so there may be some correlation that we find here, but I think that may be really kind of stretching it a little bit. We do have a picking up of just the general rhythms of life, that their lives went on and they did this thing that most observant Jews did at that time. They went to Jerusalem to observe the Passover annually. And they did it with other town people, other people that were there. And it took them a while to get there and a while to get back. There was something else in here that reminded me of one of the readings. But I cannot remember what it was. Darn. The other thing for me that's interesting to note is, of course, at the end of the Nativity passage, which if you read Luke and just read it like a story, you start at chapter 1, just keep going and not in these small passages. The last passage, or the passage of the Nativity, ends with Mary, his mother, treasuring all the things that the shepherds had said and had happened in her heart. And now here we are again. How do we make sense out of this? Is this some sort of awareness that Mary has regarding Jesus? Well, she did have an angelic visitation, so maybe we could attribute it to that. But it could just also be that this is part of like what parents and what mothers do, is even these episodes in which there might be what we would call out as misbehavior. Those episodes are remembered. They become the stories, part of the family stories, part of the incidents of what was there. Oh, do you remember that time when you stayed back at the temple and we didn't know where you were? So treasuring these things in her heart could just be more the memories that were made and established. There could be more to it, and I don't want to downplay that. It could be that as Mary observed Jesus sitting among the elders and how he spoke with authority, it did remind her of the angelic visitation and some of the things that had been said to her, that as he ages and as he grows, she sees in him and experiences how this is going to influence, or how those things that were spoken by the prophets and that the angel said were going to be true are beginning to be embodied and lived in the person of Jesus. So there could be more than simply just the making of a memory that was there. This is essentially it. And we have his parents acting like parents. You know, sometimes we elevate Jesus to such a degree that we don't make Jesus human. Should he have been with them? Yeah, he should have. And so what's said, like, why have you treated us like this? We've been searching for you. You know, Jesus' response is not something that parents would take lightly. They wouldn't go, oh, okay, you've been here in your father's house. But it's a sign, of course, of Jesus's divine origins, which is, we know the end of the story. We know the story from the cross backwards. And so this unfolding of the story, we already have that information that we're armed with. And so we end up reading it in such a way that when we hear that, we think to ourselves, well, of course, in my Father's house, in God's house, because of the end of the story. But if we read it without that in mind, it would be a very curious statement. And it would sound rather petulant in the sense of responding to a parent in this way. Now, this being the season of Christmas, where do we go with all this? You know, do we talk about Jesus' childhood? How is it that we remain in the season of Christmas, a season of joy, a season of festivity, and pick up on these scriptures? And what do we sing and what do we do? Well, this is a great time to sing some of that hymnody that we all treasure. So, of course, we sing Joy to the World. We sing Christmas carols or Christmas songs in the season of Christmas because we are in that season. But I do think that there is a lot here that we can pull from, whether that's really recognizing the significance of the incarnation. That is, this is God in human form. And so Jesus had a childhood, and Jesus grew up, and he found his manners, and his parents taught him the rhythms of the religion. Like that, is it placing Jesus not knocking him off of the pedestal, that would be a bad way to put it, because of course what we say about Christ, but recognizing that it's important for us to acknowledge his humanness, to not just automatically translate Jesus into divinity, but we have to hold the divinity and the humanity together. And one way to do that is to be reminded of childhood. Could be one option, is to really explore and lean towards that gospel reading. Another might be looking at some sense of clothing picked up by Old Testament and New Testament, which is likely where I'm going to go with it. And what it is that we are asked to put on, and what the annual visit says to us. Maybe that's kind of what Christmas encourages, is like Eli and Elkanah's annual visit, is Christmas Eve, our annual time to return. So a couple of ideas. I'm anxious to explore the Epiphany readings with you and look forward to that opportunity. As I said, that is my ambition, to still maintain this discipline with you next week. So I hope and pray that you will join me at that time. I hope that I'm able to live my ambition out in accomplishing that. I pray that you will join with me on Christmas Eve at 8 o'clock, in person or live streamed. And it is available after the live stream concludes as well. So if you can't be here physically present at 8, or if you can't join us online at 8, you certainly are capable of watching that service as an archive service anytime after we conclude. So you could watch it at 10 o'clock at night. You could watch it at 11 as the old midnight service, as it used to be called. And then we gather for worship again on December 26th at 10 a.m. And that's when we will have these scriptures proclaimed as we live through the season of Christmas this year. So I look forward to being with you all then. God bless you. Take care.